was in the first page of search results for Chicago set designer, which I need to fix now because I'm not in Chicago. But I would get the weirdest reach outs from people who were like, I've just graduated from this program and I want to work at your scenic design company. And I had to be like, no, I can't pay to myself. Let's not.
Chicago set designer, you are second.
I'm second for Chicago set designer.
I look up Chicago set designer. The first thing is production hub, which sounds like something else. Set designers in Chicago, Illinois. Production hub. Let's see if you're on here.
Am I the first individual?
According to this, but then again, I might have already looked you up. So like the algorithm is doing algorithm.
I thought I was on the
page. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to News from the Real World. Already, okay, cool. Let's start over.
Pass the cold open, please.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our News from the Real World podcast, where we talk about the 10 no! I'm just going to read it.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, and welcome back to our News from the Real World podcast, where every week we discuss the top 10 comment-generating posts on the blog. My name is Parker. I'm a second-year stage and production manager.
I am Grace. I'm a first-year costume design grad.
And I'm Evan. I'm a scenic grad first year.
All right. Grace, would you like to talk about the first article?
Speaking of laughter, can it be lethal? Dr. Linsey Marr on aerosol transmissions of COVID. I also realized, should we be sharing these?
Can you see it? Is my screen share working?
Yes, I see it.
Oh, I don't. So never mind. Forget. Don't worry about me. I have it up. So this is an article or an interview between John Stoltenberg and Dr. Linsey Marr, who is I guess is considered like the leading doctor on like scientists on like aerosol transmissions, which is a very cool thing to be the leading expert on. She is a professor at Virginia Tech, and basically this article interview is just this person asking this expert, how safe is it for us to be doing theater indoors? Long story short, John asks if she would be comfortable seeing any theater indoors, and she's like, nope. But then they keep bringing up kind of like scenarios, like what if there's a space that has advanced HVAC systems that filter the air like 6 times an hour and there's no more than 50 people. And she was like, she uses this phrase that, not that she says that it's like, okay, but she says that it's better. Okay. So if everyone's masked, she says, let me rephrase that. I will say that it is a lower risk situation. So she's definitely not trying to like endorse going to events indoors, especially if it involves things like laughter, because she talks about how laughter is somewhere between like talking and a cough in terms of how much that can come out of one person's mouth. But she also brings up a good point, because I feel like she mentions that like when teachers go to school, aren't they basically kind of like performing for the students in a way? And so how is that any different than how we're treating at least live events right now, like theater and other performances and stuff? So, and I wholeheartedly agree, because I feel like we still don't know the full extent of how this virus travels, right? Because I mean, wow, what a week, right? So we're just learning so much about every day about how the virus is like more dangerous, because at first we weren't sure if it was dangerous on surfaces and how long it lasted. And now the CDC is saying that like the most dangerous part is kind of what stays in the air once it's been in the air and how that can be transmitted. Um, so yeah, it's very stressful. I think if anything, this should just make people want to distance and stay inside even more, right? Like not hang out with large groups of people. And I don't know.
It's interesting bringing up the point that laughter spreads, like increases the spreading radius, right? Like that is something I hadn't thought about, and that's certainly an aspect of doing in-person theater. One of the probably many types of ways to spread the virus doing a live in-person event. It's something that I'm still concerned about and something that I don't want to do as a person yet. I want to keep waiting it out.
Yeah. It's funny, the school example, because I do feel like I don't want to be in a physical theater anytime soon. I think I'd be super uncomfortable. But if next semester CMU is like, oh, and this class is in person with masks on, sitting and listening to a lecture, right? Like, there's a part of it that's like, would I go? Do any of you have in-person classes right now?
I have 2 hybrid classes that I'm able to go to if I would like to go to, and I haven't gone yet, just because I feel like once I've got myself set up virtually, and it's like classes that are in the middle of my schedule for the day, I don't want to like go to school and then come back and still have classes. I like to have it all set up in one place.
Mm-hmm.
That's just where I'm at for this semester.
Yeah. I feel that.
Yeah, I have one in-person class, and it's my draping class, which I definitely feel like I'm glad I have the option to go in person, but there's only 4 students in the class. And I don't know if, you're all familiar with the costume studio, but it's very large. And like our professor stands in the middle of the room at his own table, and we're each at our own large cutting table. And what we all have to do is like log into Zoom, because he's got this overhead camera to show us stuff that he's doing that we can look at on our screen, so that we don't have to be close to him. But like during class and stuff, like, if we've got questions, he'll have to kind of like, but I don't know. I feel a slightly safer like going into the school if there are only like 4 people in the class than if I were to go to like the grocery store, just because I know that the school is being cleaned regularly. Like I would like to think everyone's taking it really seriously in terms of cleaning up after themselves and like wiping down surfaces. So I don't feel as like nervous going to the campus, but I do like, I went to like an apple orchard yesterday because it was fall, and I was like, it'll be outdoors and it's big, but it was still very stressful. Like the number of people who pull down their masks or just like weren't wearing them, and who weren't distancing from me. I almost like turned around at one point because these people were in line, like, and this guy was like shoulder to shoulder with me, and he was like talking so loud, and I wanted to turn around and be like, excuse me, can you like stay away from me? But I don't know, escalation, you just don't know what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. There is a little bit more pressure to be unpleasant in public now. And it's hard for some people. For me too.
Yeah.
Speaking of doing events in this COVID landscape, this next article, Times Square New Year's Eve celebration goes viral for 2021. Live elements still to be determined. So really, this is kind of just a quick announcement as to where we're at in terms of the New Year's Eve celebration, just because nothing's really in the works. They don't have a complete list of performers or anything. It's just very much in the trial period. But the first thing that struck me at the beginning of the article, it said, and this article was written last week, we're less than 100 days away from 2021. And that just kind of jumped right out at me at the top. I was like, wow, so this year really has gone by this fast. But there'll be a small group of honorees in person, completely socially distanced, wearing masks, and the evening will be focused on celebration of things that have come out of 2020, and not so much a focus on the things we've all heard so much about, like COVID. The mayor, Bill de Blasio, says a new year means a new start, and we're excited to celebrate. So very positive. It won't be live, which is slightly odd. It says that they're going to make an attempt to make it live, but it is very unlikely that will happen. So it does give the benefit of each person in their time zone watching it at the correct time for themselves.
Oh, that is interesting. One of the things that I think is interesting about this also is that the New York celebration of New Year's going virtual will not be very different for most people. Like most people who appreciate that spectacle appreciate it from home. You know, I think that it's very much a TV show that has a live audience and not a live show with a TV audience. So I think they probably can find a way to do something that is similar to the way that it usually is, except of course for that big loud countdown and all that spectacle of people kissing in the streets. I think is maybe not gonna be kosher this year.
I mean, don't people wear like diapers all day, like in Times Square? Because like they have to wait. I mean, like if you want to wait in Times Square and watch the ball drop, like you have to be there all day, like
Right,
starting at like noon, and then like you obviously can't leave. So I've heard that people wear like diapers and stuff, and I'm just like,
Oh, wow.
that's just like a level of commitment
No,
for something that just isn't that important.
It's always sounded so completely miserable. And whereas like watching it at home is like you kind of comfy, you know, you're with people you like. It's not cold. There's bathrooms.
Yeah, I like the point you brought up about it not being much different for most people. And I'll certainly still be tuning in at the end of 2020. And boy, will that be a happy moment.
In my head, though, the way you've described it, Bill, have like the normal shooting shots of the ball dropping and just empty streets below it. I think that's really funny to me. Just complete silence. The screen counting the numbers.
But it's a pretty straightforward article, just kind of summarizing what the initial plan for the celebration is.
I think that brings us to my first article, which is headline, "The Metropolitan Opera closed until fall 2021 due to coronavirus concerns." The Metropolitan Opera in New York had originally planned to reopen in December of this year, but instead they decided to wait until the fall, or, I'm going to quote this, or until a time at which a vaccine is widely in use, herd immunity is established, and the wearing of masks and social distancing is no longer a medical requirement, which is a long wish list. This article makes a clear distinction between the Metropolitan Opera as being separate from other New York theaters, especially Broadway theaters, and big Broadway theaters simply can't operate with reduced audiences and still be cost effective. But even at the Metropolitan Opera, the director who's being interviewed says they're going to find ways to cut costs. So when they come back, it won't be at their full, I guess, budget capacity.
It was more just information being shared, really, right? It wasn't too long of an article.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting about this is that a lot of theater artists, when they look at the industry, now that we're in this pause moment, have said we shouldn't come back the way that it was before. We should change things. We should fight for better pay. And the fact that already theaters are talking about needing to be leaner on the budgets when they come back, you know, we know that it's going to affect.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know of a lot of theaters that are producing like work with people like in person. I don't know. But like I guess SNL came back, and I haven't read about how they're doing it, but obviously they're not like distancing and wearing masks while they're filming. And we had this like forum with the costume designer of Hamilton, who said that his associate is in Australia right now, quarantining in a hotel room for 14 days straight. Like she can't physically, like she cannot leave the room. Someone delivers her food to her, and like just so that they can like get to do it. And I was like, wow, like that's intense to do Hamilton. Like how are they gonna, but there's still an audience. Like how do you account for that, So I guess I don't know how. Like I agree, we shouldn't be doing live theater again until we have all of those things on that checklist.
Definitely.
It's just a lot of risk.
A friend of mine was just on a new Fox singing show, and she had to go quarantine in a hotel for 14 days, as well as everyone else a part of the production before filming.
They're filming new singing shows right now. That's wild.
And that was a complete shock to me. And then we saw it, and it was filmed live. And because she's a friend, she's talked a little bit about when, no specifics, but we knew she was quarantining because it was filmed post-COVID. Just absolutely.
I watched a little bit of the SNL clips that came out on YouTube this morning, and Chris Rock, who's the host, in his interview, and by interview I mean monologue, mentions the degree to which the entire audience has been tested, that he's been tested multiple times throughout the week. I have to imagine that the actors are all just part of the same pandemic pod. The entire band, entire audience are wearing masks, and I think the actors are the only ones who aren't.
I think, and this this is related to, how the White House is I think it is right now accounting for almost all of the cases of COVID, at least in the District of Columbia right now. But that testing can kind of create a false sense of security, right? Because I was reading an article, and it's when you get tested, it's really only that one moment in time in which you can confirm that you didn't have COVID at that one moment in time.
Right.
And so, I just wonder if how truly effective consistent testing can be, especially if you do have a lot of people saying that there can be false negatives. So yeah.
Yeah, and especially in the life of an actor is already such a you're already giving up so much to do that, right? You have to. There's some Ethel Merman quote, which is maybe too salty for the air, about having to live like a nun to do musical comedy, and to give that up, and also not to be able to even see people, not go to the bar afterwards, not see your friends for brunch, whatever that is, right? Because of the pod being so small, seems like a lot to ask of an actor.
Definitely. It's interesting because everyone's going to move forward in this and do it a little bit differently and do it a little maybe. Yeah.
Next article is also, oh, sorry, you want to say?
I was going to help you transition. You go for it.
Okay. I got this. I have two back to back, which makes it easy. And there are similar lines. My next article is from the same site, Broadway News. It's entitled "Why Six Plans to Reopen in London This Fall." The British production of the musical Six is going to reopen for a 11-week run with a distanced audience. Six is a really cheap show to run. It's 80 minutes long, small cast, no significant tech elements aside from things that are already loaded into the theater, like lights. It's the person being interviewed, who's a producer, says that he wants to reopen it, quote unquote, to give work to the staff, which seems like a bit of spin work, perhaps. And there's a bunch of changes they're making in order to reopen. The theater, the venue that they're in, is putting forward some of the money to renovate the theater to more distance between rows and that kind of thing. And then the production will take over those costs. And then the production is also putting money towards rebuilding the scenic elements so that they can then take them on tour, which I guess is not part of pandemic safety. But it has a sticker price of £850,000 that they're putting in to get this show open again. There's a list of things they're doing here that the theater is doing. It says they're sanitizing the space, respacing the rows, preparing one-way walking routes for audience members. Tickets will be contactless, and audience members will undergo temperature checks upon entry. First 2 weeks have already sold out, which is, I guess, answering the will people come to theater during a pandemic question. And then there's this quote, which I like. He says, the economics, this is Kevin McCollum, one of the Broadway producers. He says, the economics are obviously an issue, but the primary issue is when is it safe? And this article also notes that, like the opera article, it notes that the Broadway production of Six, this is not even a conversation because it would cost much, much more to reopen on Broadway right now.
Well, they can't, so.
Well, and also they're not allowed to by law.
Yeah.
Until January something.
Yeah, I guess the thing that just stresses me out about any kind of talk of no matter how good your plan is that you also have to rely on a new audience, a new group of people every night to follow those rules.
Mhm.
And I would like to think that those who are dedicated enough to come to see theater during this time would really like put in the effort, but you really just don't know. And again, it's like I'm very much like team vaccine. Like
Yeah.
once there's a vaccine, I'll feel fully comfortable, but until then, like everything's just a risk, right? Like walking down the street or going to the store or I don't know, walking to campus because you just don't know.
Right, right, and this is the laughter thing, right? We know that being in a confined space over a long period of time with a lot of people who are producing aerosols is not going to be safe until the virus is not part of our lives.
Yeah, and this is, I forgot to mention it when I was talking about that article, but the Washington Post came out with an article earlier this summer just about like they ranked like 13 different kinds of masks and their effectiveness, like by percentage at how they were at blocking anything from like leaving the mask. And they rank them from like N95 all the way down to like the cloth cotton ones that you make, that people make. But they say that those, they're called neck gaiters, but you know, they're just like kind of like those weird scarves that people just like pull up over their face. They're worse than not wearing a mask because of the way they like transmit. They turn like your spit more into an aerosol
Into
than
smaller
like,
droplets. But
yeah.
there was, I have to find the actual facts for this, but there was, I think they retracted, the scientists involved said that people misunderstood that part of their findings. And there's been some confusion about what it actually means since then.
Yeah, I guess it just concerns me because like 90% of the people I see
Totally.
walking down the street are wearing those, or they're wearing bandanas, which is hey, are like the next in terms of like the least effective. And they say the most effective like ones that you can buy as just a regular consumer in America are those. They look like the surgical masks, sort of. They're like polypropylene, and they say that they're like obviously N95s are the best because they create that seal around your face so that nothing can get out, but those are obviously in higher demand. So anyway, this is my PSA about wearing masks and wearing masks effectively.
Should we move on?
Yeah, we're really killing these transitions.
Six reopening.
The transitions are always so much fun. The next article is the future of experiences according to a theme park designer. I thought this article was really cool. It was like an interview with a Micro 2 chief development. Here, let me back up. Free, who is a co-owner and chief development officer for Micro 2, a global entertainment development and production agency. So just kind of to talk with this woman about design in 2020 and what it looks like with COVID happening everywhere. This company has done things from like Halloween haunts to theme parks and focuses on large installments for various different companies. They said that they kind of drew parallels between creating a movie and creating one of these events. And in the same vein, the destination is now different. They're still starting from the why and designing whatever they're looking at doing from the why, but the destination is the thing that's changed. Now everyone is sitting in their homes and it's a different social contract to log onto the computer and witness whatever has been created versus going into a park or going into some sort of established event. It's a different interaction, and this woman kind of talks about acknowledging that and moving forward, acknowledging people are in their homes, utilizing that, bringing it into the conversation, and all through the lens of theme park design, which I thought was pretty cool.
I also like that she talks about the function of design helping people feel safe.
Yes.
That there's a point where part of the work the design is doing is in a normal year is creating an environment that people can feel safe and comfortable in, and there's a push and pull there of wanting people to feel safe and also wanting people, of course, to be safe.
And Disneyland's reopened, hasn't it?
Yeah,
as of recently. So it's theme parks are coming back quicker than what it seems like the theater industry has come forward, I suppose.
Right.
I don't know where I was going with that, but
No, I mean that's the thing though, right? Like you want, when you're designing Disneyland, you want to design a place where people are disarmed in a way,
right.
they feel comfortable and feel out of their normal routines.
Totally.
But you don't want them to then feel so disarmed they take off their mask.
Speaking of managing a very large park or a very large event, the next article is titled "The Year of the Stage Manager" on howlroundtheatercommons.com. It's an essay by Amanda Spooner, who is the stage manager who started this kind of campaign, Year of the Stage Manager 2020. This was written on the 22nd. I want to briefly kind of describe what the Year of the Stage Manager is, and then read a couple of quotes because Amanda really puts it into words well. She kind of came up with the idea in 2019 and wanted to bring awareness to what the stage manager is in terms of theater and the importance of that role, as she had found many times colleagues didn't fully understand what the stage manager's role was and what the stage manager's process was. And so she started this campaign on Facebook primarily. It's a large group, which I was invited to a few weeks ago, and I've been looking through the posts on this Facebook group. It's honestly very, very cool what this has grown into be. But 2020 was set to be the year of the stage manager, and this was all planned out before COVID hit. And COVID kind of brought a much bigger wave of people to this event. Now everybody was online and the cohort was growing. So it's become this check-in on Facebook. What does she say in the article? I want to get an accountability community is another word that she used with this Facebook group. So here's a quick quote. We, meaning stage managers, are seldom credited in press releases. We are rarely recognized publicly at events like award shows, yet it is universally understood that without us, if we failed to do what we do, shows would be left in the dark. And I thought that kind of summarized the point very well. As a stage manager, and I struggle with it as well. But another quote, because we try to stay out of the light, our lack of visibility has undercut our advocacy and prevented many of our well-meaning colleagues from understanding what we do. And it was interesting. It was putting into words a lot of things I felt, but didn't know if they should be shared, like, oh, it's just, that's the job. And Amanda talks about at the beginnings of this movement, getting backlash from people who say, that's your job. You're meant to be in the dark. You're meant to be taking a back seat without getting that credit. And it's put in the context of the article when she mentions that it seems so silly that someone would have a viewpoint like that. Of course, get to know every role in the theater. And then she transitioned into the stage managers being pivotal in creating an anti-racist environment with this whole new wave of revolution, going on in the United States, like this layer and layer against COVID and everything together. So another quote to that extent, much like the performing arts in the United States, the roots of stage management are tangled around white supremacy culture, further perpetrated by the fact that a majority of working stage managers are white. A photo was shared in the article of about 100 stage managers meeting in New York City. And it is an overwhelming it overwhelmingly reaffirms that last sentence, the fact that majority of working stage managers are white. I have just recently done a project where I looked into equity's demographic breakdown, and 68% of equity members are white. And that's something that it falls on a lot of management to change. Look at how are we reaching out to communities that aren't strictly white folks, how can we help that number in ways? So it was interesting to look at all of those different things. She also mentioned COVID potentially rendering the stage manager useless as we move towards this model of theater that looks more like film and less like theater, where it's more video switching than it is calling or things along those lines. And just reading, rendering the stage manager obsolete in this article was shocking, because it's a fear or a thought that I've had as well. Ultimately, a very good read. I've rambled long enough about stage management.
No, but I think we're all frustrated with quote unquote Zoom theater, with theater that doesn't have any managed tech elements, right? And I was so excited when at the beginning of the semester in an online meeting of other scenic grads, someone pointed out, and I wish I could remember what it was called, but a video platform that is not Zoom that allows you to
StreamYard?
have a manager, huh?
Is it StreamYard?
It could be. I think it is. Yes, allows you to have a manager who is managing those tech elements and is controlling the presentation and how things look in some of those ways, which is not explicitly what stage managers did pre-pandemic, obviously, but I think theater's better for having stage managers in it. Obviously, there was this incredible video that went around maybe a month back now, which maybe you guys saw on Facebook, shared on Facebook, but it was this. Just a stage manager doing like opening calls for the, did you see this? She's got like blue and red lights behind her, and she's just like in her house, and she does like all of the 5-minute and so on pre-show, and then the like first 2 or 3 cues of the show. It's and like also like it's just like pre-show headset chatter, like you hear her checking in with like the soundboard guy and the backstage people, and it was super cute, and it was also one of those things where it's like, I miss headset chatter. I didn't know I missed headset chatter. Yeah, obviously the theater world would be sadder without stage managers.
I mean, I just don't see it. I think that's funny because I'm just like, I feel like the stage manager is like the one person that they're not going to kind of, get rid of if they had to eliminate positions, because and I don't know if this is a concern that you have in terms of like what it is you do in this new world, or because I can see people being like, well, that's not what I want to do as a stage manager,
Right.
But like, even if there's just someone who can like have contact information and like make daily calls for rehearsals, like, when you're in theater, and especially when you work at like a larger level too, you realize that there's like a person to do all of these small jobs.
Right.
And there's a reason, because it just like makes people's lives easier, right? It makes the process easier. And I think, that's why I see stage managers as just like this position that is like the most valuable, right? Like you're
Yeah.
sort of like the person who knows everything when it's, not the director's job, when the director isn't thinking about everything at once, or like the actors don't know everything in their minds. There's like so many different positions, especially when you have a running production too, right? You've got like,
I think the thing I'm missing as a stage manager is, of course, I enjoy paperwork. It's who I am. It's the profession I've chosen in terms of daily calls and getting those things out. But the real challenge that's missing for me in Zoom theater is that everyone being in the same place at the same time, and being able to see how it's functioning, see the inefficiencies, see where we can, not even inefficiencies, but like problem solve in the moment, in real time, with the same people in the same space. And that's a thing about stage management that's much harder to do when we're all on different screens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think, at least, and that's just throwing out things, but
right. Well, and when I took stage management classes in undergrad, the mentor at my undergrad often said that part of the job of the stage manager is to run the room.
Right.
How do you run a room you're not in?
Right. And I've not stage managed a Zoom production yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't fully speak to the differences there, but just in terms of communicating with colleagues and things like that, and production managing and trying to have those meetings in a virtual world is already just so much different. But
this article made me realize that stage managers don't get mentioned in press releases. Like, it didn't even occur to me. Like, I know it's unintentionally, I think intentionally unflashy, but when you think about like the leadership of a show, it's always like director, stage manager, and then design team in my head. And the fact that you list the design team maybe and the actors and the director in the press release, but not list the stage manager.
Right. That's something I hadn't thought of either.
Yeah.
Something I hadn't even began to think about. The other thing that they mentioned that was shocking to me is, I completely lost my train of thought. Anyway, that's does anybody else have anything to say on that one? Should we move on?
Speaking of equity, so the Actors Equity Union, I guess, has received a spike in complaints of racism. But I think, none of this is a surprise to me, because I feel like probably all industries have received a lot of complaints, especially with, not that it was only just this summer, but the Black Lives Matter movement, having the surge in protesting after the, death of George Floyd. But this article also mentions how there was a huge surge in complaints of like sexual harassment in the workplace during like the Me Too movement with Harvey Weinstein. So basically what equity is trying to do is, well, I guess right now they're getting lots of complaints. I don't think it is surprising to me personally that in theater, especially with actors, that there are lots of complaints about racism and sexual harassment or assault. I think these are all very unfortunately things that a lot of people are it's a part of the business, right? You kind of have to put up with this stuff. And I've never been an actor, nor do I have any desire to be one, but I can't imagine what it's like to not just be told that you're not good enough for something a lot, but to also because of your race or your gender identity, right? So basically, I need to remember what his name is. The president of Equity, he's the youngest they've ever had in this position, but they're trying to make they're going to try to make these pledges to make the union actively anti-racist. So how they do that, I'm not from a realistic standpoint, not sure, just because I think based on this picture of him, I'm going to assume that he is white. And what I believe from my experiences is that it's really hard to change things top down if the leadership doesn't reflect the change necessarily. But he is pretty young, so he's 32. So maybe there's some hope there. It's probably going to take a very long time, but yeah, they just also address things like the class barrier in terms of well, how I think of it is how do we, because I know that to become a union actor or designer is obviously going to give you more opportunities where you're going to be paid better, or you can have more consistent work. How can theaters or industries or whatever support those people in terms of helping them become union? And I don't know of any companies who do this, but it's something that I've brought up when I was working at a regional theater. It's well, if you only hire union designers, do you help buy any of them into the union? Do you know what I mean? What are you doing to support young people from your community who are talented? And it's sort of that idea. It's how do you what you say you want to work with new people with new ideas, but you're just perpetuating this system that keeps them away. Oh gosh, my boyfriend's dad is FaceTiming and I'm on this computer. Sorry, I just declined him. Sorry, I was just thinking about how that interrupted what I was saying. I'm sorry, Sebastian. Anyways, yeah, so that's just a big thing that having lived in DC, I noticed that there was a huge divide between designers who designed a lot locally, who were local at very small theaters, and then the really big theaters, like the big Union, like Lort B, whatever of that variety, how the only designers they were bringing in were from New York. So interesting, even though there are a ton of union designers in the DC area. So I just thought it was interesting. It's sort of this, they silo people based on their status in the industry, and perhaps they're using, which I find ironic, they're using the fact that they're local, like, against them. Even though they know this audience probably better than any of those New York designers will. So
There's a story that I heard about a Chicago theater, which I will not name. It was doing a show set in Africa, and the original designer had to step down, and they asked a white designer, not director, to fill in the role, and then asked him to have as his assistant somebody who was from a minority group, which I thought was an interesting approach to the problem, which was frustrating to that designer because he had a regular assistant that he usually worked with who was not from a minority group, who knew how to work with him and he knew his style and that kind of thing, right? But I appreciated that the theater said, we want to make space for incoming people who are diverse from the white guys who often do this work. And this is the way we think we can do it, right? Whether or not it worked out for that production, I thought it was an interesting idea.
yeah, and I've heard that that's like there are lots of like loopholes with IATSE and stuff where because you know how often theaters will pay for like an assistant, right? Or at least in my experience, they give like they give the designer an extra fee so that they can use that towards their assistant, who is probably like swatching for them in New York. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm speaking from like a costume standpoint, or like, doing all the stuff in New York while they're here in wherever they are. And maybe it's just from theater to theater, I'm not exactly sure, but like I've seen a lot of loopholes where they like the associates can be non-union, which is a way that like union designers will try to help get them the work at these larger spaces. So I'm not entirely sure about it. I don't know a whole lot about it, but that's what I've heard. So I don't know. I guess it's good that maybe some people are sort of working the system to help others.
Yeah. Another thing that this article points out that I think is really positive is that these rise in complaints are tied to these movements. I think it suggests that these movements are positive because it allows people who hadn't come forward about issues of racism or sexism to realize that those complaints could be taken seriously and bring them forward.
And should be taken seriously,
Right.
So I'm an equity membership candidate and
Nice.
working towards becoming an equity member. And it's nice so I'm included in a lot of the statements and the emails that go out.
Me too.
And it's, oh, nice. It's awesome to see that they care, and it's not going, it's not slipping under the radar again. They're acknowledging this issue. They're acknowledging the time that we're in, and they're working to create an anti-racist theater, and I think having these organizations back the anti-racist theater movement is something that's going to get real results. That's how we actually see the demands of the We See You White theater, white American theater. That's how we get those demands in effect. So it's exciting to see the unions taking this seriously.
And speaking of We See You White American Theater, thought this would be a good segue, but this next article titled Bay Area Theater Artists of Color Demand Bold Steps Towards Racial Justice in Online Documents. So this article sort of talks about the We See You White American Theater group and the statement of the list of demands, and just sort of the things that they've done to call out like this racism in a lot of companies. So if you're unfamiliar with We See You White American Theater, it's pretty much what it's called. I think it's just a lot of BIPOC artists calling out a lot of white American theater, predominantly white institutions. And so this article focuses specifically on this San Francisco-based actor. I believe his name is, it could be Eli, Ely, Sunny, or Kiza, or it could be, I'm gonna Ellie. So someone out there, please know that I'm not definitively pronouncing his name correctly, but he and other Bay Area artists have also created their own kind of like more local document. It's called the Living Document of BIPOC Experiences in Bay Area Theater. And basically artists have just been submitting entries like about their experiences, but also talking about specific people in that industry in the Bay Area, calling out companies. And the critic says that even she gets called out in it as well, which, yeah, it makes just as much sense to call out the critics, especially if they're just perpetuating, this like white supremacist lens in theater. But yeah, maybe a question I pose to you all is, in terms of the We See You White American Theater, especially how they have been actively calling out theaters and like posting pictures of their board members and their artistic directors of those companies who haven't released any kind of statement in response to either the Black Lives Matter movement or just the We See White American Theater in general. How do you feel about that? Like, do you think this is constructive, kind of openly shaming these companies and these people? Do we think it's...
I think it certainly brings attention, right? And I think it helps ultimately bring attention to the demands, which I think are the most important. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, it could have been an article I haven't read in a long time, but I believe and at least one organization has actively made changes because of being called out. So in that sense, we're seeing positive results. And it's, a little bit harsh, I suppose, but I think it's deserved. And I think it's necessary to see change.
Yeah. I struggle a lot with just the idea of like, in not like coddling, but like not being like very intentional and very like truthful to these like white institutions. Because like, as we all know, when you like call people out on stuff, and especially when it comes to racism and like white people, like white fragility is alive and well in America, all around the world. So sometimes it can be really hard because the second you call people out for being racist, especially in this sort of like woke liberal like world that theater is in, you get like, it's not constructive because the people who like the fragility causes them to be defensive as opposed to like actively listen. So that's why I brought up the question, because I guess I think shaming is like very accurate of what they're doing, but like it's like sometimes that's what you have to do, right? It's like you have to shame your dog when it pees inside.
Well, and I guess the larger problem is I don't think that theater companies are a monolith, right? Like I think that some theater companies will listen to being shamed and say, yes, we will learn and grow from this, and other theaters will, or individuals, boards or whatever, will double down and say, well, actually, maybe you're racist for calling us out, or whatever. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all approach that is necessary, although I don't know who I expect to come along and tailor an approach different for every theater. I mean, I think the work is monumental. Calling them out is certainly easier. And I think there's a certain point where taking no action is the wrong choice, right? But I appreciate that some people have said, hey, like on Facebook, I've been like, I wrote to the company and express my concerns. And that might work better for some companies if it's someone's knocking on my door.
Do they want to join the podcast?
I don't know. I'll check.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, a lot of white theaters, there's just no way that like these white theater companies can come out of this unscathed, right?
Right. I think change is just, it has to happen. Especially with it just seems like it shouldn't even be an argument. It's been going on for so long, and now it's at it has come to such a monumentous peak that we have these list of demands. No one should have had to write that out. That should have been something that innately happened because of respect for all people, and now we have to, like that. Those demands are so specific. They are so specific for how a theater organization can be an anti-racist theater organization. And I feel like change is necessary. And I think a lot of people will see that. I hope.
Yeah. So let's get rid of those 8 out of 10s and those 10 out of 12s.
Yeah. Yes.
There's nothing more depressing than eating all 3 of your meals in the same.
Well, and it's crazy because there's a point I realized last year before the pandemic. I was like, God, I really did pick a career that is about being in dark, windowless rooms at all hours. Like, I just never see the sun anymore. It's so important to be able to get out of the theater sometimes.
Yeah.
This is me. This is my article. This is an article from Dance Magazine called "Meet the Choreographic Interface Designer Who Brings Her Dance Knowledge to Google." I had to pull this quote from early on in the article to frame things around, because I'm not familiar with some of the ideas expressed here. So the quote is, "Interaction designers define the structure and behavior of interactive systems such as Gmail, YouTube, and Instagram." So these are people who are focused on the ways that people interact with tech and with programs, and making sure those interactions are make sense, understandable, right? And this article is about a interface designer who is working with dancers as tech moves into 3 dimensions to bring the language of dance to interface designers so that they can use that as a grounding point for tech in 3 dimensions. So you're talking about things like virtual reality and other, I don't know what other 3D tech interfaces are. There weren't a lot of examples, but there's also a backwards benefit to this, which the article points out for dancers, because they'll be able to record dance performances in 3 dimensions and be able to not just see a flat image of something, but to be able to look at what the body's doing from all angles as well.
It's very interesting stuff. That's very cool to see that. It's always interesting to me when those complicated tech questions get answered by theater and dance, or dance or movement, or when something so specifically tech is answered by something so specifically human is interesting to me, and when those things come together.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very curious to see what the evolution of this work is. I'll admit that I had to read the article a few times to try to wrap my head around it, and even still, I'm not 100% clear on how they expect to meld the two. But knowing what the human body is capable of and using that in virtual environments seems really interesting. I mean, we talked a bit about virtual reality last week, but I'm certainly curious to see what the future of virtual reality and the body is.
We're putting our conspiracy hats back on.
Yeah, right.
We are AI.
The Matrix.
The LA River. This is the best transition I got. We are just bulldozing transitions today.
Art. I guess we didn't really talk about who's going to talk about this article.
Oh, that's right.
So there's a river in LA.
Evan, you want to help her out?
We could popcorn this.
No, sure. There's a river in LA. It's called the LA River because they're good at naming things. And a nonprofit named after the LA River is putting together some kind of performance that is happening live at the river, but is accessible only from the comfort of your home virtually. And they're bringing together a huge range of artists across various specialties to create some kind of experience that explores the history of the river and future of it.
I guess they don't really use like a specific term, but I guess I'll call this person like the director, Mikhail Tara-Garver, who is an experiential arts veteran. So it sounds like, because this is going to be a very a very like immersive kind of like conceptual thing, I think. And Evan, chime in if you feel like you have a better understanding of like physically what it's going to be, but it just kind of sounds like they're bringing together a lot of different artists of different mediums to sort of create something that will sort of tell the story of this place in this space, but I guess virtually.
Is it almost creating like a venue? Like these are a series of a multiplicity of different types of events is what it sounds like, Yeah,
I think they're doing a full year, and part of the goal is to raise awareness. I think part of the goal is also to raise money. The nonprofit is not a theater company. They're looking to revitalize the area around the river with public works projects and things like that.
So was the question of whether or not we should be creating virtual experiences something that was brought up in the comments?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, this goes right back to the beginning of our episode today about well, not just about laughter, but about Zoom theater, about if Zoom theater is worth it. It's hard to, especially since so much of what the three of us do right now is Zoom classes. It's hard to find the energy to also fill all of my evenings watching Zoom theater pieces. Because I don't get as much out of it as I do from being in the same room as the theater piece. I don't, I haven't yet. I'd love to be convinced otherwise. I'd love to be blown away sometime.
I'm certainly still excited to see what comes out of this semester, the productions that are produced this semester, just to see what additional prep time and additional training could be. I mean, last semester the productions came up with amazing things, but we were pivoting in the middle of a design period, and everyone was at different stages. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens. I'm excited to watch, but I see what you're saying as well. Like logging on to another Zoom thing at the end of the day is quite stressful. But it's also not completely unlike taking theater classes all day and then going and sitting in the same theater.
Yeah.
Somewhat easier, but.
Did any of you all watch SNL like right when we started kind of going into quarantine and see kind of this, you could see those like sketches that people were doing from their homes?
Yeah.
And I thought that was really a great way of like addressing that, like, we are all doing this by ourselves. Like all these, I mean, obviously I'm sure you had production teams who came together and like delivered costumes or props to these people, but for the most part, like they had to like come up with it on their own, right? Like, I don't know if every person who like necessarily like writes a sketch gets to perform in it, but like, I think in this case, they probably had to even more like think of what they had around them to work with. And that was something I really enjoyed. It wasn't live, I guess, but maybe approaching Zoom, I don't know, just not like putting us in little boxes in a way, or finding a way to like make it not look like Zoom, right? Because we're in school and it's like we're on Zoom all day. It just kind of feels like we're doing more school afterwards. So
at the school level, I'm excited to see what playground is like, because I have a friend who's on the committee, and he can't tell me details, but he said there's a lot of people who are approaching the problem of doing Zoom theater in some interesting, innovative ways. So I'm hoping that I get people like us to lead the way and find exciting the exciting future of Zoom theater, you know, and then hopefully we can in a couple of years look back on it as something that we did once and we'll never do again. Definitely.
Ending on a positive note this week.
Oh yeah. No. Genuinely though, I think it's exciting. I think that the innovation is exciting, and I mean for all my grumbling about Zoom theater, I mean I'm going to another event this evening, which I feel like I've seen a previous iteration of, which I think does a good job of walking a medium. You know, adding. This is it, right? I think it's about adding interactivity back. You know, making it not a movie. And this thing I'm attending this evening has that element where the things that you do as an audience member matter in some ways.
Very cool. Awesome, everybody. Well, thanks for joining us on another week of news from the real world, and we'll see you next week.